Hello, Michael and I want to talk to you about building accessible web mapping applications. First, let's talk about Esri's general accessibility resources. So the legal site at Esri is where you'll find our statement on our commitment to accessibility and details about the compliance of various products. So you'll see these as accessibility conformance reports. They're also sometimes referred to as VPATs. You'll also find answers to common accessibility questions. So let's go take a look at that site really quickly. So here
that are WCAG and
is the
508
Esri
compliant.
legal site where, as I mentioned earlier, you can find our commitment to accessibility with details for both US and international customers. Up here, you can use this drop down to choose the conformance reports, common questions, and additional information on accessibility in general. We're also working on a new accessibility site that's going to collect a bunch of resources dedicated to accessibility at Esri. So you'll have some best practices, links to articles, documentation, general resources, this contact Esri accessibility form where you can ask a question and it will get sent to the appropriate people at Esri to provide you with an answer. So you can find that link in the footer of all the pages throughout Esri.com. So if we go back, here we're at Esri.com. In the footer, you can find a link to that accessibility page where you can find out best practices, ask questions, more information. So first, let's really quickly talk about why accessibility is important. First of all, there's a guideline, right? So legally, it's a thing that we have to do to be compliant with things like WCAG and 508. But even more important, I think everyone should have equal access to the web. So you can see in this quote down here that website accessibility affects almost 60 million people in the USA and over 1 billion people worldwide. Those people need to do the same things we need to do. They need to find directions to a particular business. They need to find out where they can go to get their COVID vaccine. They might need to know what the guidelines are for zoning in a particular area. All that information that we display on the map and we want to access, so do people with various disabilities. These can be visual disabilities, so they can be visually impaired. They can be cognitive disabilities where they need more time and a more organized website that makes it easier to find information. Or people who can't use a mouse, who have to be able to access your content via the keyboard. So if you think about it, making your site accessible to more people in more places makes your site a better website. So in general, good accessibility is good user experience. So good accessibility is good design. It's worth spending the time to make sure that your content is reachable by, everybody, including the 1 billion people worldwide who have various disabilities. So this is only a 30-minute demo theater. We can't teach you everything about accessibility, but this is one good resource where you can get started. So W3C is the Web Accessibility Initiative. They have a great website that has lots of good information on accessibility in general. So you can find out the fundamentals. You can find out details if you're a developer or designer, more information on how to test and evaluate your products, and the standards and guidelines that you have to meet in order to make your content compliant. So you'll see that there's lots of information here, including some tutorials, developing. So if you're a developer, how to make sure that your code meets these requirements and the best practices for ensuring that your code is accessible. There's a quick reference here. If you want to know what it means to make your website compliant with WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, you can come here and check out this quick reference. It has a list of all the various guidelines that your site needs to adhere to, and it has details on what it means to be compliant and techniques for ensuring that it's compliant. So this is really good information. It's worth not memorizing all of it, but certainly browsing through it and being aware of what's there and the various resources at your disposal. And accessible mapping is a bigger issue. So, what does it mean to make a map accessible? That's something that's kind of still being defined We'll talk about some various strategies in the next slide on how you can work on making sure that your content is usable by people with a wide range of disabilities. But there are some resources that can help you get started. I really like this Minnesota IT accessibility resource. If we come here and look, we can see that they have information about making your map accessible with some subsections on general good design, so that's symbology and font. Making these static digital maps, not everyone needs to create an interactive web map, but sometimes we still need these JPEGs or PDF files that aren't necessarily interactive. And then finally, some good tips on building interactive web maps. Another good reference is the W3C reference on accessible maps. This is more information on just discussing the guidelines around making a map accessible and sort of starting to think about what techniques people can use. There are some short text descriptions of various options, like making tactile maps that are accessed via touch, or acoustic maps where sound is used to convey information. And then they have a small bit of information on making maps accessible to people with cognitive disabilities, deaf people, elderly people. So while this doesn't have as many great solutions as the Minnesota guidelines do, it's a good sort of overview of the state of making maps accessible and what it means, and including at the bottom some citations for research on various approaches for how we can make these maps accessible for a wide range of people. What are we doing at Esri? So let's look at just a few of the Esri products. The Storymaps team, they are building their apps with accessibility as a top priority, both in the viewer and the builder. The recommendation is that if you're using the classic Storymaps, things like Cascade and Map Journal, that you migrate over to the newer versions of Storymaps. They have built-in accessibility features, so you can provide alternative text for things like images and videos and logos. The theme options, they ensure that they met the color contrast guidelines. They support keyboard navigation and their screen reader support. For Web App Builder and Experience Builder, for Experience Builder, they're undergoing an accessibility audit right now, and accessibility support is on their roadmap, so stay tuned for that. For Web App Builder, you want to work on the latest version, and some themes are supported, well, all themes are supported with some limitations. Same thing with the widgets. If you want to find out details about the support level for the widgets and the themes, they have a great article here that talks about, here's the themes. For example, we mentioned that Dashboard and Launchpad had limitations. The limitations are listed here. And the widgets, they have their support level, and the limitations, if there are any, are also listed here. So you can be aware of these when you're building your Web App Builder site. So ArcGIS Online Configurable Apps, that's the team that I work on. We are also making accessibility a priority. We recently underwent an accessibility audit, and we are addressing the issues that were found in that audit. I encourage you to listen to the on-demand demo theater session, Testing Your Apps for Accessibility, the online approach, where Krista and Sarah are going to go over some of the techniques that they used to evaluate the issues that were found in this accessibility audit and help test them when we fix them. So there's going to be a lot of good information on testing your apps for accessibility in that session. So let's start talking about some strategies for ensuring that our maps are accessible. So first, you want to think a little bit about your app that you're developing. This can be a custom app that you're building, custom development, or an app that you've created with one of the builders, Storymaps, Web App Builder, or Configurable Apps. You want to think about the purpose of the map. So what is it? Is it a map showing the location of a store? Or is it a detailed map with lots of demographic information and data that you somehow have to convey in a way that everybody can understand it? So you'll want to describe the map. It might even be worth writing it down. What is this map trying to do? What's the purpose of the map? What are you trying to say with the map? And then you want to start thinking about, are there ways that you can provide that data in alternate format? What makes sense for this particular map? Maybe it's a table, maybe it's accessible search, maybe it's a PDF document that you provide access to via a link. How can people interact with the feature? So we need people to be able to interact with this content both via the standard mouse or touch, but also via the keyboard. So can they do that with your map? And if not, let's think about providing that information in one of these alternate formats so they can access it. And then finally, does the app need a map, or can you just provide access to the tabular information? Does it make more sense to build your map around the data instead of around the map itself? So here's a simple example where we can just provide alternative text. So we have this map image. It could be an interactive map that's integrated into your website that shows the location, in this case, of the Esri Olympia Regional Office. For a sighted user, you can look at this map, you can see the name of the street where the office is located, and you can tell that it's by a traffic circle and across the street from the farmer's market. But for non-sighted users, you have to provide alternative text. So here's an example of some alternative text that we could use. So we tell the user what they're looking at, in this case, the Esri Olympia Regional Office, the address where it's at, 111 Market Street, and then we give some contextual information. We say it's across the street from the farmer's market. So we give some landmark to help people find that location. So this is an example where we have alternative text that describes this content in the map. So this is one way of making these simple maps accessible, is providing a good textual description for that content that they are provided when they access it via the screen reader. In some cases, you have a lot more data. So here we're looking at a map that has, San Diego colleges and universities. So there's quite a few points in the map. If we provided alt text, we'd just be saying this is a map showing the colleges and universities in San Diego, and maybe add some more information. But that wouldn't really help people who couldn't look at the map. They would not be able, or interact with the map via the keyboard. They wouldn't be able to access the same information as a keyboard user would. So what we could do is we could provide something called a skip link. So if we look up here, we have this skip to table option. So you can hit that skip to table becomes enabled when you focus that application. So it's the first thing in the tab order. So I hit tab, that becomes focused. I can click it and it will take me directly to the tabular information or a link to some other page that has that information in a way that we can access it. So let's look at this example. I have it open here somewhere. Okay, here it is. So we can see that we have this skip to table link. It's been activated. If I click on it, it would take me to the tabular information that I could then navigate via a keyboard. So for sighted users who use who use the mouse, they can click on an individual feature to see the same information that we provide here in the table. So the skip link can be a good option for providing access to that map content. In the JavaScript API at Esri, there's support for mouse and keyboard navigation and also gamepad. The help has information on the various supported keyboard commands. So if we look down here, there's some of these are mouse commands, but for adjusting the view, pointing north, rotating the view counterclockwise and clockwise, zooming in and zooming out, we can use the arrow keys, the plus and minus for zoom, and some other commands. It's worthwhile coming through here to be aware of what commands are available. Let's look at an example of an interactive map. The source code for this is available on GitHub. This map actually uses something called a live region. So what happens, we'll look at the map and talk about it. So here's an example of this map. What happens if you're listening to it through a screen reader is that we tab in and interact with this button, which opens up this tool here at the bottom of the screen. And the live region is updated so that screen readers know, hey, we can use the arrow keys to navigate throughout the map. And as we navigate, features that are within that geometry, that square on the map, are listed down here in this panel and associated with a number. So the screen reader will be saying number 1, Gregory Canyon, number 2, Crown Rock. If Crown Rock is the park that you want to go to, you can hit 2 and it will open up the pop-up. Focus will be added to the pop-up and that information will be read out for the user. So they'll hear Crown Rock Trailhead is located at, this address, and they'll get all that pop-up information. So this is one way that you can work with map content via the keyboard, where people can navigate around. So this works fine for a smaller subset of features, but if your map had hundreds or thousands of features, it wouldn't really probably make sense for users to navigate around the map via the arrow keys to find an area that they're interested in. You can zoom in and zoom out, and it will tell you how many features you find with that location. So again, this strategy works for a smaller set of features where it might make sense to let people use the keyboard navigation to navigate around the map and access that content that appears within that square. So as I mentioned earlier, the source code for this is available on GitHub. You can take a look at it. You can see how live regions work in JavaScript, and you can potentially implement a solution like this in your application. Finally, another option is potentially integrating a search with a pop-up. So in the JavaScript 4x API, the search widget is compliant. So in this example, we could come here to the search box, enter something that we're looking for. In this case, it's lunchtime, we're looking for sandwiches. And then when this sandwiches pop-up appears, we as developers send focus to that pop-up. So you can see here the focus arrow is around this close button. People can then either close out if this isn't the sandwich store they're interested in, or they can read through the results. So they say Subway, and there could be more information about the hours that it's open or the address that they would hear when they listen to the pop-up. When the pop-up's closed, you want to send focus back to that search box so that they could potentially search for a new term or continue navigating through the map application with the keyboard to access additional capabilities. Okay, I wanted to point out one more thing. When you're working with mapping applications within the browser, there are some strategies we can use for testing. And as I mentioned earlier, Krista and Sarah have that demo theater that has a lot more details on testing applications. But I wanted to point out a few things that I think are useful. I happen to be using the Chrome browser right now. So if I go to the developer tools, I have an extension enabled, and it's the Axe extension from DQ. So you could go to Chrome extensions, enable this, and you can see that it has this ability to scan all or part of your page for accessibility issues. So it'll find various issues. You can click on each of these issues and get more detail about it. You can inspect the exact element that it is having an issue with and see how you can fix it. So there's some color contrast issues we have to fix in this particular sample application, and there might be some issues with ARIA roles. So this is really a great way to do a quick test in your application. Another tool I really like in the Chrome developer tools is you can use this pointer to select an element on your page. So let's maybe select the Esri attribution. Oops. I clicked on something else. So you can select that element, and you can see when we access that pointer, if we hover over it, it brings up this pop-up which tells us some good information about that element. So it tells us the element we're on, the color, the font, and most importantly for our purposes today, it has the accessibility information. So it tells us that our contrast, our color contrast is good. We have that check mark. It tells us the name and the role of this component. And then it tells us we have a check mark, so we know that it's keyboard focusable. So we can, hover around various other elements on the page. We can see that this is the zoom in button and it's keyboard focusable. It tells us the background color, etc. So those are really nice, quick and easy tools that you can use while you're developing to just get a sanity check and to make sure, okay, this thing's keyboard focusable, the color contrast is good, it's got the proper role, I'm on the right track now. So, spend some time becoming familiar with those tools and investigating them on your own. It's worthwhile. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he's going to talk about various mapping strategies. So cartography, base maps, the content of your map.
Thanks, Kelly, for this outstanding coverage of the development strategies, and I completely agree with you that these accessibility techniques should be part of every developer's toolbox. Well, for my part, my name is Michael Geig. I lead the UI UX engineering team in our professional services division, and I will walk you through some strategies you can employ to improve the accessibility of your maps. The first section that I will talk about, titled General here, might surprise you. And then we'll dive into the magic lands of cartography and cartography best practices and base maps. So let's get started. Let's take a look at this map. It's a map showing electrical outages. The different symbols, the green circle, yellow diamond, orange square, and the red triangle, indicate currently active outages of different magnitude. The pink upside down triangle indicates a different kind of outage, a so-called public safety power shutoff, PSPS. So why did PG&E use different symbols and not just different colors? Maybe because of accessibility concerns. Now, from a business perspective, this symbology makes sense because the number of affected customers is an important variable for PG&E. But since this app is for the public, the question is, are we solving the right problem? So we should rather ask ourselves, what is important to our users? And the answer in our case is probably, I'm sitting in the dark. What happened and when will power be restored? So people in distress want to know what's going on. Of course, we need to combine these answers and this knowledge about our end user needs with our knowledge about the business, which means we have to learn about the business first. And then we can start simplifying. And by having a simpler map, we automatically have a map that is easier to understand and easier to navigate. But everything starts with solving the right problem. So I have a bonus tip on this slide. Be careful when you choose shapes and colors that may have specific meaning outside of the GIS community. So since we're already on the subject of cartography, symbols and colors, tip 1, avoid red, green, or stoplight symbology. Of the many color deficiencies, deuteronomy is the most common type of red-green color blindness. It makes green look more red, and 8% of the male population has some form of red-green anomaly or blindness. While I was trying to find images for this talk to actually show you kind of what this red-green means, I stumbled across this image showing Ishihara test circles for color blindness. And on the left side, you see what people with regular vision see, and on the right side, what red-green colorblind people see. And I thought to myself, what do you mean? They are identical. And then it started dawning on me, maybe I belong to the 8% with a red-green weakness. Well, now you ask me, Mike, I'm not a design genius. How can I find a good color palette? How can I improve? Well, glad you ask. There are various tools out there that can help you, and I'm posting the links to them in the last slide, so don't worry. But I want to point out two of them. A fine collection of color ramps created by Esri can be found on the developer documentation site, and Color Brewer 2.0 is also a really good reference. Both sites do offer options to filter for colorblind friendly or colorblind safe palettes. Additionally to colors, consider using different shapes, textures, and patterns. In short, anything that does not rely on colors alone. So have a look at this map. What are the features that stand out? I'm going to give you another second here. So I made some changes to the map. And I ask you, do you spot the differences? Would you have seen the forest or the main building in the left picture? Or in other words, do you see how effective shapes, textures, and patterns can be? What about contrast? The definition of contrast is how well one color stands out from another color. And the difference can be measured using a contrast ratio checker tool that calculates the difference between colors in the foreground to colors in the background. This ratio has to be 4.5 to 1 or higher to meet WCAG level AA standards. The map you're looking at works well. Well, for one reason, because our cartographer made it, and our cartographer made sure that there's sufficient contrast from the text to the map features, and also from color to color, within and between groups of features. For labels, the easy solution is adding a halo, which ensures that the ratio between the text color and the halo meets accessibility criteria. But that doesn't always mean that labels are legible. So the example on the right is good, but the example to the left is twice as good. And oh yeah, increasing font sizes helps too. So Kelly already talked about using alternative text and descriptions, and this applies to maps as well. Here are some examples. Apps may show map data in an alternative form, like a list in this COVID-19 dashboard. Another simple technique is to describe the content through titles or metadata map element tags. That's a mouthful. Including a legend with textual descriptions of symbols is really helpful and useful too. And finally, you may want to invest some effort into symbology that varies across multiple scales. For example, use dual encoding at small scales, feature labeling at medium scales, and dual encoding or no labeling at large scales. So let's talk about base maps. Depending on your content needs, you may want to choose from two types of content fidelity. Reference base maps provide low content fidelity with little detail, and they are perfect for displaying your data. The four base maps shown here, the light gray, dark gray, human geography, and the world terrain, are great options. But using them also means that you have to ensure for yourself that your data has sufficient contrast and works well with the chosen reference base map. On the other hand, information base maps have a high content fidelity. That means they are richer in data and they show more details that are already included in the base map. The two quote-unquote Skinner base maps here, which are named after our very own Andy Skinner, have already important accessibility features baked right into the base maps. So things that Andy has done is, for example, he removed content. Remember the simplify rule that I talked about before? He adjusted scale ranges. He increased contrast. He applied stronger colors to water bodies. He used colorblind friendly and safe palettes. And he also improved labels by enlarging them and by using higher contrast. So all in all, I think Andy did an amazing job with his base maps. And this is it already. Here's a collection of references we have or have not mentioned today. I wanted to point out that the last three links are links to Andy Skinner's blog and to the accessible base maps that are ready for you to use. And with that, I hope you have enjoyed this talk. Please let us know how we did and take a minute to provide your feedback. We'd very much appreciate that. Thank you very much and good luck on your next accessibility endeavor.